Hello again, and welcome back to Educator.com's Advanced PHP with MySQL course. In today's lesson, we're going to be learning how we can add data to our database using the SQL INSERT command. So we're going to learn about the syntax of the SQL INSERT command, which is used to add data to a database. We're going to learn about how to specify values that we want to insert into a database. For example, when we insert strings into the database, we have to enclose them in quotation marks. So we're going to learn about some rules for doing that. We're going to learn how to, we're going to walk through the process of actually populating our items table that we created in our last lesson with the sort of default items we've had in our store. In our web application, we've had sort of 6 items that we've had through all of our web application examples that we've added, that we've had in the store, and we're going to go ahead and add all those using insert statements. We're going to talk about how you can have a bunch of SQL commands or SQL statements in text files, and then you can actually just sort of, in a way, import that text file into the MySQL monitor, and it'll run all the commands for you. And then we're going to go over another required homework that's going to have you to set up the items table by populating it with the sort of those default 6 items that we've had in our web store application. So as mentioned, the insert command is used to insert rows into a table in a database. It has the syntax defined here. Basically, it has 2 keywords, insert into, followed by the table name. So you'd say like insert into items, for example. And that's going to say we're going to be inserting data into the items table. And then what you do is you can specify the names of the columns that you're going to be providing data for. So you name the different columns. For example, you might say item ID, name, and price. Then you have the keyword values, and then within parentheses you specify the different values that you want to correspond to the different columns you've listed. So the first value would correspond to whatever column name you've defined here. The second would go to this name here, and then so on. And you can do that for as many columns as you need. There's also sort of a shorter syntax where you can leave out the column names, this section here, and have a command that would just be insert into items, for example. And then instead of having this column definition, you would just say values. And here I'm just putting them on separate lines, but they don't need to be just for readability. And then you would just specify the values. Now the thing to note about that is that, and this was mentioned in the last lesson, is when you create a table and you use a create table command, you specify columns in a particular order. Well, that sets up basically the structure of that table and how those columns are ordered. So if you're going to be using this form of the insert into, or the insert command, without specifying the column names here, and you're just specifying values, you have to specify the values according to how those columns are ordered in the table definition. So for columns with numeric data types, for example, our price column, you simply specify the literal value that you want to insert into the database without quotation marks. So if we wanted to set a price to $15, we would just type 15.00. For columns with string data types, however, for example, a car data type, a varchar, and a text data type, you have to surround them by quotation marks, either single quotes or double quotes. And just as in our PHP strings, if your string that you're inserting into the database actually contains one of those quote characters itself, you must explicitly escape it using the escape sequence / single quote to add a single quote to the string, or / double quote to add a double quote to your string. Another important thing is for columns that have the auto increment attribute set, which for our items table is the item ID column, because we want it to generate a new item ID automatically every time we add an item to the table. What you do is when you provide a value in the insert statement for that particular column, if you provided a value of null or you provided a value of 0, then MySQL is going to know to go ahead and auto generate that new item ID, in this case the new item ID, to whatever the next value in the table is. So you specify null or 0 to do that. Alternatively, you can also explicitly set the value for an auto increment column by actually giving it a particular value. You can actually, for example, if this is our column definition, insert into, and we said item ID was the column, values, say we're just inserting one column, we could explicitly put 1001. And that way it wouldn't do the auto increment feature, it would set it to the value explicitly specified. So now we're going to talk about how to insert items into our database, basically taking that command that we just sort of learned about abstractly and putting it to work in a real-world example. So we're going to be basically inserting those 6 default items that we've had in our web store into our database. This command right here is going to be used to insert the first item in the database. So we're saying insert into the items table values for these columns, item ID, name, price, description, and image file extension. We're saying give them the values. In this case, we're explicitly setting this auto increment column to 1001. And we do that just for this first item, and the reason we're doing that is auto increment. If the first time you insert an item into a table with auto increment, it automatically starts off at 1. If you explicitly set it, in this case to 1001, then every time we add an additional item and we specify a null value or a 0 value as mentioned, then it's going to auto increment it from the highest item number there in the table. In this case, it will have already been set to 1001, so the second item is going to be added as 1002. We're going to specify the name of the item. Notice that it is in quotation marks because it's a string. We're going to set the price, which is just a number, so there's no quotation marks. It's the string 15. We're going to enter the description, which again, because it's a string, it's enclosed in quotation marks. And then the image file extension, in this case JPEG, because it's a string, it needs to be enclosed in single quotation marks. Notice that there's parentheses, around the names of the different columns, and then there's parentheses that surround the different values that we're going to be providing. So let's go ahead and add this first item into our table. So we're going to connect to the MySQL database as our PHP user, just as we've done in the past. We're going to use the advanced PHP database. And a command that I'm going to do I'm going to show the tables that we currently have, which we've only created the one so far. It's going to be items. So we have an items table, and I'm going to issue a command now that we're going to learn about in the next lesson called the select command that basically lets you see what data is in that particular table. So don't worry about the syntax of this right now, but it's basically saying give me all the rows in the items table, and we enter it, we can see it's an empty set, so that we know that our items table is currently empty. So now we're going to go ahead and insert that first item into the table. So we're going to insert into the items table. And we specify the names of the columns. And then we specify the values we want to associate with those columns. And for this one, I'm going to have to look back at the slide because I don't remember exactly what we had. So the second one, the name is a string, so we're going to enclose it in quotation marks. The price was $15. The description, which is another string, it's going to be enclosed in quotation marks. This 100% cotton t-shirt is built for comfort. I continued on the next line. For comfort, finish the quotation marks, and then the image file I believe was JPEG. So then we'll enter JPEG. Again in quotation marks. Have the closing parentheses for our list of values and a semicolon. It's going to, when we hit enter, it's going to let us know the query was okay. So if I run this select command again, which again we're going to learn about in the next lesson, to see if we have any data in our items database, and we're going to see this row. We're going to see it's got, it's kind of hard to see here because of the size of the screen, but it's basically, it has the item ID we entered, 1001. It has the name, 100% cotton t-shirt. It has the price, $15. It has this 100% cotton t-shirt is built for comfort. and then it also has the file extension given to JPEG. Now the other way that we can insert items in tables, as mentioned, is not by specifying the columns, but just specifying the values in the order that the columns are defined. And remember, for our auto increment columns, we can just specify null or 0, and that's going to have the database automatically generate that for us. So actually, we'll get to this file in a second, but I actually have a file that basically contains insert statements for all of the different 6 default items that we have. So I'm going to reference it so that I can type these in manually. So we're going to enter the second item into the table, which is a 42-inch LCD television. So we're going to say insert. So let me clear a little space here. Insert into items, values, and now I have to specify these values in the way that the table was defined. And actually, let me go ahead and throw an error there to just get out of that command. If we describe our items table using the describe command, we can see that the order they were defined in as item ID, name, price, description, and image file extension. So that's the way that I'm going to have to specify them in the parentheses in our insert statement. Now the first one is item ID. Because we want it to auto increment, we're going to set it to the equal to value null. The name is 42-inch LCD television. Notice it's in quotation marks. Also notice, however, that even though this includes a double quote, I don't have to escape it with a backslash because it's included within single quotation marks. So that's similar to how PHP works. Let me make sure I had the right name for that. 42-inch LCD television, $599.99. The next column is price, so we're going to enter without quotation marks, $599.99. The description, with 42 inches of viewing screen, you feel like you are a part of the movie. And then the image file extension, which is, in this case, it's a GIF. So we enter GIF in in quotation marks. We finish it with a closing parentheses and hit add a semicolon and hit enter, and it's going to let us know that the query was okay. It's going to say one row was affected, which I didn't mention before, which shows that one row was inserted. Now if we run our select query again to see what's in the database, what's in the items table, see if there's some way I can get this so it looks better. We can see that it's actually added 2 items to the table. I'm going to do a modified select statement, which we'll learn more about in the next lesson. I'm just going to get rid of the description. I'm not going to have it pull up the description value in the results that it returns, just so we can see it all on one screen. And again, don't worry about the syntax for this right now. So you can see that it's actually added another row to the table. It gave it the value, the item ID value 1002. So you can see that when we specified null for item ID, it went ahead and auto incremented it, took the greatest value that was in the table, in that column in the table, which was 1001, incremented by 1. And then we can see that it went ahead and set all the different columns for the table. It set the name to 42-inch television, price to $599.99, and the image file equal to GIF. So one of the things that you can do is the MySQL Monitor client can be used to run multiple commands sort of at the same time. And basically what it allows you to do is you can create a text file that just contains all of these commands that we've been typing into this interactive MySQL prompt. You can go ahead and edit them sort of offline in a text file and then basically import this text file into the MySQL Monitor. It'll go ahead and run all of the commands in that particular file. And basically the common thing that's used for is insert statements. So for example, if we want to insert a bunch of data into our database, here I have this text file created, and as you can see, it contains a bunch of insert statements, all with syntax exactly that you would use if you typed it at that command prompt. And it just contains a bunch of insert statements that insert all of their 6 default items into the database. You can contain any sort of SQL statements you want in these text files. So for example, one of the statements that I have at the top is use advanced.php, because that's going to let MySQL know that we're inserting these items into the items table that's in the advanced PHP database. So that's something that you can include. The way that you have MySQL or the MySQL monitor run these commands is you use the MySQL command, but then what you do is you use a less than sign and then the name of the file that contains all of the commands that you want to run. Now the commands can be held in any text file with any extension as long as it says text file, but the convention is to end files in this .sql extension. And that's what we're going to use in this course. So basically this is saying I want to connect to the MySQL database on the local host because no host is specified. As a PHP user, I want to be prompted for the password. And then one other thing to notice here is that if let's say we hadn't included that use advanced PHP statement in our SQL file that I was just talking about, we can specify what database we're going to use at this MySQL command prompt by the last thing we enter before the less than sign is the name of the database we want to use. So this is going to say connect to the localhost MySQL database as PHP user, prompt me for the password. When I log in, I want to be using the advanced PHP database, so I don't have to type the use command. And then I want you to run these commands contained in commands.sql. Now the one thing to note is that when you specify after this less than sign the name of the file that contains the SQL commands that you want to run, you have to make sure that the MySQL program, the MySQL monitor, knows where to find that file. So in this case, commands.sql would have to be, it interprets, if an absolute path is not specified, it interprets as a relative path. So in this case, commands.sql would have to be in the same directory where this MySQL command is being run from. So you might have to, for example, specify an absolute path. Maybe you have an SQL file called items.sql stored in the user1 directory of the users directory on the C drive. So you would replace this commands.sql after the less than sign with the absolute path to the file. So that way, so that's one problem that you might encounter is you need to make sure that MySQL is able to find the SQL file that you're trying to import. So we've already gone. Now this file contains it contains all of the six. It was set up to insert the 6 default items into the database, but we've already inserted the first 2. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this from this file, and then I'm going to have it insert into the file the remaining 4 items. As you can see here, what I've done is for the next 2 items, I've just specified the values, and so we have to specify the values in the order that they were supplied, that the table was set up in. So it's item ID, followed by the name, followed by the price, description, and image file extension. Then in this last part, in the 4th and 5th one, we're going to explicitly name the columns. I'm going to put this on a separate line. So we're saying the first value we're providing is the item ID, providing it the name, price, description, and image file extension. Here this should be null. And then one thing to note is that you actually, based on if you're explicitly specifying the columns that you want to, of the values that you're supplying, you can actually put them in any order you want. You just have to switch the order of the way they're listed in the values parentheses. So for example, if we want to specify, for example, price first and then name, we would switch the order here and then subsequently switch the order in the list down here. So what this statement is going to do is it's going to say insert into items, item ID, price, name, description, image file description. So this one is going to be interpreted as item ID. This will be interpreted as price. This will be interpreted as basketball. So it'll still work, and it just allows you to sort of switch the order around. And that's just to give you an example of sort of the different flavors you can use this insert statement that you can use for the insert statement. So let's see, this file. Let me get the address of this file. So I'm going to exit out of just exit altogether. Get a fresh command prompt. change to our MySQL bin directory so we get access to that MySQL program. So we're going to connect to the local host. We're going to connect as PHP user. We're going to be requested for the password. We're not going to specify that we want to use the advanced PHP. Actually, let's go ahead and do that. Let's specify that we want to use the advanced PHP database. And then in our items.sql file, I'm going to eliminate this line. So when we import this file, it's going to know that we're using that advanced PHP database already. And then we're going to specify using the less than sign the SQL file, this file that I've called items.sql, that contains these insert statements for the remaining 4 items that we're inserting into the database. And I'm going to specify the absolute path to it. Oops. Which is in this particular directory that I just copied from the Windows Explorer. And it's called items.sql. And when I hit enter, it's going to ask me for the password. And then, assuming everything runs fine, it's just going to run things and then return the command prompt back to the way it was before. So now to make sure that they were all added properly, I'm going to log back in as PHP user to the advanced PHP database. Oops. And now, if we type select, again, I'm not going to bring up description because it makes things longer. Again, typically keywords, they don't have to be capitalized, but keywords like select in this particular case by convention are capitalized. So this is going to say, give me all the information about all the items in the data in our items table. And we can see that it was able to successfully add those other 4 items. It added 1003, 1004, 1005, 1006 with the values that we specified. So we saw that you can use either the format where you explicitly specify the column names, or you can just explicitly specify the values in the order in which the columns are defined in the table, or you can explicitly specify the columns in any order that you want, as long as the values that you supply match up to those particular items. Match up to the particular columns. So the required homework is to basically to get you to populate the items table you created in the last required homework with the 6 default items we've been using in our store. And basically what you should do is log into MySQL as PHP user using the MySQL command prompt, and have you experiment with a couple of different things that we did here in the lecture, so you get experience with both manually typing commands and then also using that less than sign to import basically commands into to be run by MySQL. So after you log in, select the advanced PHP database for use, which you use the use command to do, and then run an insert command that's going to insert item 1001 into the database. And in this case, we're going to have you explicitly set the item ID column to 1001, and that's what that's going to do is sort of seed that auto increment column so that any item added after that, when we specify null for item ID, it's going to add to one to that, so the next item will be 1002, then 1003, and so forth. Now you can get the information to add for these particular items, the name, the price, the image file extension, the description, from, for example, items.txt, which is the database file we've essentially been using to store information about all of our items in our store. That's been our database to figure out what values you need to put to enter for each item when you enter them into the database. Then run this select star from items command to verify that the item was successfully added, and then exit the MySQL monitor client. Then what I'm going to have you do is create a file called items.sql in whatever directory you want that's going to contain insert commands for each of the remaining 5 items in the store. So one of them you're going to insert manually, the other you're going to use a SQL file for. And I want you, for the first 3 items that you add, use the insert syntax that includes the column names. So you're going to explicitly specify the column names, item ID, name, price, and so forth. And then for the last 2, use the insert syntax that just provides the values. So it just has values with the parentheses containing the values you want. Just remember that you have to specify those values in the order in which the columns are defined for that particular table. Then use that less than operator to input this SQL file into MySQL Monitor to run these insert commands. And make sure that you specify the correct absolute path or relative path if you want, if you understand how to do that, the absolute path to this items.sql file that you've created, which is the name of the file that's going to contain all of these insert statements. And so you need to make sure to specify that it knows where to find that. You can optionally, in your items.sql file, you can optionally include use advanced PHP as the first line of the file to make sure that these statements get evaluated on the advanced PHP database, because if they don't, you'll get a problem or error from MySQL. Or you can use it using the MySQL command prompt and specifying user P and then specifying the name of the database, in which case, then the less than name of your file, you can leave this statement out here. So I'll let you decide whatever you want to do for that. Then log into the server as PHP user, run this select star from items again, which basically is saying give me all the information about all the rows in the items table to verify that all of those items that you had in your SQL file were successfully added. A couple things to notice to make sure that you properly enclose all of the strings in quotes, all of those string data fields we have to enclose in quotes, and escape any quote characters as needed. And you'll actually notice that on the descriptions that we currently have for some of the items in the store, there's actually single quotes contained within them, and so you're going to need to escape those with / single quote. The alternative would be you could enclose the strings, as in PHP strings, you could enclose the string in double quotes, and therefore, for example, if you have the word Yule with the apostrophe, you don't have to escape that single quote. So I'll leave that up to you. And then also just make sure that that MySQL exe, the MySQL Monitor, can find your SQL file. So you're going to have to specify a correct path to that file after the # sign, after the MySQL command. So that ends today's lesson. Thank you for watching educator.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.